Greetings! My name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes. Welcome to our channel where we cover everything about tabletop RPGs, including advice for players and guides for dungeon masters.
We upload new videos on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and ring that bell so that you never miss an episode.
A few weeks ago, Kelly and I cracked open the Pathfinder beginner box to check out the second edition of this awesome tabletop role-playing game. And despite battling with the scheduling monster for a few weeks, we play a lot of games, and getting another game onto our schedule was a bit of a challenge. We have finally been able to play through the beginner box adventure and try out Pathfinder 2nd edition for ourselves.
And so today we're going to talk about how the adventure went, what some of our experiences were, what we liked or didn't like about Pathfinder in comparison to most of the other RPGs we play, and what the big differences were from D&D to Pathfinder. There was a lot to love, and there were some things that were a little more complicated than we were expecting. But all in all, it was a really fun experience, so let's dig in and talk about it.
So we're not going to go over what's actually in this beginner box. You can check out our previous review video if you're interested in that right up over here. So we all got together, sat down around this very table, we ordered some sushi, and we played Pathfinder for about 4 hours.
Yeah.
I think we got together at like 5:30, and we were all heading out the door around 9:30. It was a lovely and fun evening, and I'm just going to say for my part, I had a wonderful time.
As far as my experience went, it's hard for me to look at this game and say if it was good or bad because I was with such a great group of people that I just love playing RPGs with. And so it was fun regardless. We had a blast. There were so many shenanigans, and really at the end of the day, when I think of like my experiences getting into D&D and now my experiences getting into Pathfinder, there's a lot of parallels.
Yeah, and it does make me worry about our own bias, because I realize that like we didn't play with Joe and Jill, but we still played with people in our friend group that we played who've all had experience playing RPGs before. And I think for us, and we always just have a magical time. And I feel like we enjoy almost any system that we play, and so that's kind of the bias of this is that we had a great time.
Yeah.
And regardless of any of the constructive things that we might have to say throughout the rest of this video, we had fun. And that's the most important thing.
We're going to be constructive for the sake of being constructive, because there are differences and there are things that we had to learn on the fly and all of that. But at the end of the day, I think that we're just huge fans of TTRPGs. And once you get the feel of a system, I can really adapt my love for TTRPGs into so many different ways. And with the group that we were playing with, the funny characters that we were bringing to life, which we brought these characters to life in very unique ways, yes. I'd say. And we just got ourselves into so much trouble. Kyle missed his first 5 attacks, and we were all making fun of him because he's the fighter, and everybody else was getting kills in, but he couldn't hit anything. There was just so many silly and great moments that we just had such a blast experiencing and playing through, that at the end of the day, whatever system you're playing, if you're with a group of friends and you're having fun, then it's a great system.
So the beginner box adventure encourages players and the game master to learn the rules by playing the adventure. So when we sat down to play, we followed those instructions. I distributed everyone their character sheets. So Kelly was playing Kyra the cleric, and I gave everybody the player reference cards that are also in the box. There was a leftover one for me. How did you find using these?
This is probably my favorite part of the Pathfinder system, 2nd edition. These cards were so smooth to have in front of me at the table. And using the 3-action economy, you have 3 actions, little circles on the card, and you have these tokens that I would place down when I was using those actions. What I loved about this system is the fact that as the cleric, which is what I was playing, certain spells would require 2 or 3 actions. Certain other things would require 1 action. And one of my greatest moments was when I used the heal spell with all 3 actions. We were surrounded by undead, and probably one of the highlights, and this speaks to this card here, was being able to look down and be like, well, I don't have to move. The 3 actions are right there in front of me. It's the start of my turn. I have all these tokens. Being able to just slap all 3 of them down and use a certain ability using all of my actions that help the party and was detrimental to my foes. And not only that, but on this card, that was probably my highlight move. But on the card also, every time I looked at it, it had other moves I could do. Drop prone, interact, leap, seek, stand, step, stride, strike. And just little instructions for how the game actually works. Having this in front of me was just super helpful to constantly be aware of what I could or could not do, how many actions it would take, keeping track of my actions and my reaction, combined with the character sheet that had additional actions and reactions that I could do. I just found that whole system really, really smooth and really great.
I also use the reference card myself. There's not enough tokens for the GM to have the action tokens for their monsters, but it was pretty okay. Most of the monsters that are in the adventure are really, really simple. And so I really only needed to know that my monsters are going to stride and they're going to strike. And this was also one of the things about the rules that I was worried about, but ended up being a complete non-issue in play. I was really worried about how difficult is it going to be for me as a DM to track how many actions my monsters have used when I'm running multiple foes at the same time. But the fact of the matter was that I could just start moving and attacking and attacking. And for most of the monsters in the adventure, like the rats and the skeletons and the kobolds, that was all they were going to do. They were going to just move, attack, and attack. And the cool thing about Pathfinder that I really liked, and I think all of us really enjoyed, which again was a surprise, I liked that you could just attack more than once. And even though you had to take a penalty on your subsequent attacks, when Kyle missed with one of his attacks and was like, I'm just going to do it again, and then hit, that was really satisfying. And it was kind of like everybody had like an action surge sort of ability. From my experience, and I've heard Pathfinder veterans say that, oh no, you don't actually want to do so much else with your actions on your turn. You don't want to be just making all those attacks at that massive penalty. I don't understand why that's the case. It seemed to me like that was just, if you had nothing else to do with your action, just attack more times.
I will say, like, if you had nothing else to do, but also if you're the fighter, it makes more sense. For me as the cleric, there were times where taking a -5 penalty to my second attack was not worth it, but that is still an option if I have nothing else to do.
Because you had the choice, are you going to take the -5 or are you going to raise your shield?
Yeah.
And that was another action. This was one of the things, though, that I did think needed to be on these cards or on the character sheets, because it wasn't until we started diving into the hero book and realizing that basically every skill in Pathfinder, from acrobatics to athletics to stealth to deception, has actions associated with it. And not only does it have actions associated with it, those use your skill in combat in a cool way. And I was kind of disappointed that the character sheets and that didn't place an emphasis on this. For example, one of the things that you can do with the deception skill as an action in combat is feint. And that can be used to make your enemy flat-footed against your next attack. And I didn't understand why that wasn't like right there on the rogue character sheet as a thing that you could be doing to turn your sneak attack on. Now,
what I'll say is that this is an awesome feature of the game, but while we were working through the initial campaign, in the starter set, we missed this. And so I think that we missed a lot of opportunities to use our actions for other things that weren't readily available to us.
Now, going through this a lot more, like there's things like demoralizing your enemies or things like tumbling through your enemies. I know that they're here, and there can always be the argument, read the book. But I think for a beginner box, I think that our players would have done better if those had been somewhere on the character sheets, so that it would have been very apparent that there were things that you could do with your action alongside attacking to create interesting combos.
Now, we could have read the whole books, but also the books tell you to kind of just jump in and get started.
Yes.
So that's, I think, where the challenge is that had we read the full books, we may have been more aware of this. And so I do wish that there had been, like, even if on the character sheet it said more actions are available on this page in the player's guide, I would have been directed there to see what else I could do.
I just think that for the rogue and the fighter in particular, because they didn't have spells, I feel that the rogue's character sheet should have had the feint on there, and I think that the fighter's character sheet should have had the demoralize and probably the push or shove just right on there, just because those were things that you could do instead of making a second attack that were really useful and impactful on your turn.
This is a silly grievance that I have, but just gonna throw it out there. One thing that I wish, playing the cleric, I wish that I had had any form of an attack cantrip. I didn't.
Yeah.
I had my sword, which was okay, but the only times that I ended up using the sword, I mostly missed, and it wasn't really working out for me. I wish that I had had like something that would have been like a holy bolt or something of that sort.
Speaking of being the cleric, all your combat healing was really good.
Yes.
And and this was another thing that was also buried in the book, the treat wounds for the trained medicine action, which is basically healing over 10 minutes. It was a substantial amount of healing, and it could be every character can benefit from treat wounds once per hour.
And as the party cleric, there were a couple times that we had 10 minutes to kill. We had finished a combat encounter. Mm-hmm. Somebody was almost dead. And I would just spend 10 minutes patching up their wounds because I was trained in medicine. I think I had a +7. Yeah. And so I was able to pull it off and heal everybody really well. And it actually made me feel more like a cleric. I wasn't even blowing spell slots. I just knew how to help people out. Mm. And I felt like a great support character by doing that.
Yeah, and ultimately, this is kind of the way I feel about it. These character sheets had a lot of great information. I loved that things were like, I could tell Kirsten, hey, your bonus is the number in the red box. And that was awesome for that. On the back of these pages, this about the character, their backstory, beautiful artwork, beautiful things, but this page could have been more actions to do.
Yeah.
And I feel like that would have been a massive improvement over this, because straight up, none of us role-played these characters the way they were. Like, I mean, we got some ideas, but like, it really diverged pretty quickly from what was just presented on these. So I do think that would have just been a slight improvement that really, for us as new people that were following what the books told us to just dive in. The takeaway, though, is I love that Pathfinder has all these things. And the complaint that the beginner box didn't present them as front and center is a small gripe about this product specifically, that basically it was a huge strength of the system. It was an awesome thing about Pathfinder, and I just thought, roll out the red carpet for all these things, because they were awesome. Once we figured it out that was there, we loved it.
Yeah, the gripe is really that we just wish that we had known more until about halfway through the campaign, where we were like, oh, we can do all of these things.
But even I wondered if, like, the adventure kind of had a combat breakdown in the first section, and I could tell by the way the adventure was structured that it was trying to gradually introduce the mechanics. And I sort of felt that one of the things that the adventure could have done for that new player experience was, as a GM, if it had been like, had a little tip being like, for this encounter, tell your players, try shoving the enemy, try demoralizing them, see what happens.
I thought the spellcasting mechanics were pretty interesting, and I actually still haven't decided if I like them more or less than when I'm playing D&D. We didn't have spell slots. We had certain spells that I can cast once per day, and then a list of options that I can cast as many times as I wanted to. Yeah, it kind of
buried the spell slots thing in the sheets, didn't it?
It wasn't so much spell slots as it just was like, here are things that you can do once, except for heal, which I could do 3 times.
Right.
And that, to me, was a negative, but again, the 3-action economy let me empower certain spells to be more powerful by using actions. And that was a positive for me. So I end up in this sort of middle ground where it's part of me was like, oh, I don't like this as much. And then another part of me was like, oh, I like these aspects more.
Do you think that's because these were just first level characters, though?
So that was my other thing, is I am coming off of playing a 14th level sorcerer.
Yeah.
And jumping into playing a first level cleric. So yeah, I felt a little stunted in my capabilities magically. But I imagine that would change once I'm not first level anymore.
Yes.
And so I guess this gripe isn't so much like there really wasn't a gripe. At the end of the day, what it came out as is it's a different way of doing spellcasting. And there are some cool options in there. I loved the way the heal spell worked. I thought
really
it was so
do
cool.
like that you can expend more actions when you're casting the spell to get more oomph
Also,
out
like,
of it.
for not having a damaging cantrip, I still, when those undead popped up and I looked down at my character sheet and I was like, guys, this is my moment. And I knew, because we had like 3 wounded party members.
Yeah.
And I was like, the heal spell, if I cast it with all 3 actions, in a 30-foot radius, heals my allies and hurts undead. And we were surrounded by skeletons and I was like, this is my moment. And it was my moment in the campaign. And so that just felt great.
You also roasted all the rats in the first encounter.
I did use my burning hands right off the bat to just decimate a bunch of rats. So I did feel pretty cool. I had my clutch moments.
Yeah. How did using perception to roll initiative feel to you?
Honestly, that makes sense to me. Perception is your awareness of the things happening
Yeah,
around
that made sense. I liked it.
So perception as initiative. I mean, this one, I can't really say positive or negative. I could see why it felt more appropriate, but really you're using one skill and another skill. They could have said roll constitution and it's still like, okay, sure.
Yeah.
But it makes sense.
The degrees of success thing came up a few times as well. Kyle really liked this because there were several enemies that we fought where Kyle's fighter was critting them if he rolled a 15.
Yeah.
And that was cool.
Now, let's talk about this. Degrees of success felt super awesome.
Yeah.
Except for 1 or 2 places.
Okay.
One place that we didn't need degrees of success was climbing down a 10-foot cliff. Oh my god. So near the beginning of the adventure, there's a 10-foot cliff.
And
it
it's
is
slippery.
It is slippery.
Yes.
So I get it. Because it's slippery, they wanted 2 successful checks to go down. But because of the way degrees of success works, there was this fat middle ground where if you failed, but you didn't fail by enough, you just didn't make any progress.
So how many rolls did it take you to get down the 10-foot cliff?
It took me about 8 rolls. Because I just kept landing in the middle. I wasn't very good at climbing, but I wasn't failing by a lot. So I was just stuck there. We made it into a very funny scene because I had just given Kyle's fighter...
It was a DC 15.
Yeah, it was DC
down.
15. My character wasn't... And I just made fun of Kyle's fighter because he fell. And I was like, that's not how you do it. And then everybody was laughing while I got stuck on the cliff.
I guess like you were just like legging the edge, like trying to find a foothold for like,
But between the 4 characters, it took us over 10 minutes, I think, to actually get down a 10-foot cliff. And but I came away from that being like, if I was the GM, I would have just been like, it's just a success or fail.
What I want to say is that's on the adventure, not on the system.
Correct.
Yes, that was a flaw in the adventure itself, which we'll talk more about the adventure and its flaws in a moment. But I liked that degrees of success were in the system. I know that this was, structurally speaking, this was the learning experience of, hey, here's how degrees of success are integrated into the system in a simple way. This specific instance was not the strength of it. The combat ways, all the cool ways that you could knock people prone, the way saving throws worked as well, everything with that, and the critting on 15s as a fighter was super awesome.
Yeah.
I really like that. The critical hit mechanic is great. And it's fun also that attacks don't have that applied the other way around.
Yeah.
Right? That like there's no critical failure. I could see a version of the system where there was, but there isn't a critical failure on the attack.
Yeah, and I think, like, to go back on my point, the thing about the system is that degrees of success is amazing, And I think as a GM, knowing when to apply degrees of success and when not to is going to be valuable.
I feel like overall for playing the system, I think the degrees of success baked into the system and the 3-action economy are awesome. I really like how all of these skills have actions that are that require your character to be trained in them, that rely on how good you are in that skill to work, and that you can also turn those skills into actions that your character can perform intentionally rather than just having it be up to the DM being like improvising everything. I think that those strengths were palpable in playing this, and I really, really liked it a lot.
Now, I'm going to bring up a weakness of the system, but before I do, I want to say that this is the weakness everybody talks about with Pathfinder, and at the end of the day, it wasn't as big of a deal as we thought it would be. And that is the name that some people call Pathfinder Mathfinder.
Yeah.
There was only one moment, I think, and it wasn't so much me being confused as it was me seeking to make sure I was following correctly. And it was when Kirsten was making a second attack with her rogue, but her enemy was flat-footed.
Yes.
And
she was using an agile weapon.
Yeah.
So normally the second attack penalty is -5, but it was -4 in this case because she was using an agile weapon. And so she had the penalty, but her enemy had a penalty to their AC as well because they were flat-footed.
Yeah. Now, at first glance, we started discussing this, and yes, it took longer just to make sure that we had the calculation down.
Yeah.
And that everybody at the table understood. Now, this was our first time interacting with this mechanic. So coming from a D&D background where it's advantage, disadvantage, pretty straightforward, this took a minute longer, maybe not even a minute. Once we got it, by the time we were done playing this adventure, it wasn't so much an issue. We kind of were starting to understand the lingo, the dialogue, the pluses and minuses. But in that first instance, we all had to be like, okay, can we go over that one more time?
And maybe a Pathfinder veteran can explain this to me. I don't understand why flat-footed is a -2 penalty to AC and not a +2 bonus to hit a flat-footed enemy.
I would rather all my calculations just be in one place.
Yeah, like the flat-footed thing being an AC penalty, because you can an enemy becomes flat-footed by being flanked, and this is one of those things that immediately, not to call attention to this, but I was like, oh, this is like 4th edition. 4th edition had a mechanic called combat advantage, which was a +2 to hit. If you and you either had combat advantage or you didn't. And combat advantage was kind of the precursor to 5e advantage in a lot of respects, because it was either on or off, and it was something that, again, 5e doesn't have the rule for flanking, but 4th edition did. And again, an enemy becomes flat-footed in Pathfinder when you're flanking them. And it just seemed to me like my immediate read of this is like, why isn't flat-footed just +2 to hit? And instead of calling it flat-footed, call it, I mean, I guess they're not going to call it combat advantage, but because that was also the thing that turned the rogue sneak attack on. There were a whole bunch of things that I was like, oh, this is where I knew, as someone that's played 4th edition, Pathfinder 1st edition, that's played 3.5, I knew where the genetic legacy of this was coming from in the rules, but I was just like, +2 to hit is way easier for players to grok than -2 to the enemy AC.
And I think we ended up applying it that way anyway, just for simplicity's sake.
Yeah.
And again, what I'll say is by the end of it all, it was fine. Everything was, we were understanding the math, but this definitely was a crunchier system. And there was more, okay, so I'm attacking this person because of this, I have this bonus, but I have this penalty, and this person has this bonus, or they have this penalty. And so you do have to do a few more calculations, which we all know are not my favorite.
Yeah.
Did it take away from my enjoyment of the game? Not really. No. I had just as much fun playing this as I would any other TTRPG. I just needed a few more seconds every time that we had to work out some calculations.
I honestly want to know, was it considered not to have the multiple attack penalty? Because I wonder if the system could have been balanced around the additional attacks not having a penalty.
I also like if we were going to give a penalty, I feel like -5 is quite a bit. I would have gone with increments of 2, -2, and then -2 again.
I mean, it feels meaty. It does. I just, from my read of it, was I didn't see why there, like, until we discovered that there were things like faint and demoralize. I was like, okay, well, why don't you just do it all the time? And I figured that the penalty was there to dissuade you from doing it all the time. But maybe if as we play Pathfinder a little bit more, maybe we'll understand why that is as far as a balance thing. But that was my immediate response is like, I like the penalties, seeing penalties come back and seeing penalties in a lot of places coming from 5e, where penalties are very rare and more often it's like a bonus or just advantage disadvantage. That was a change. That was something different, and my brain was immediately like, is it possible to just, like, how do I mathematically, what are the mathematical shortcuts?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like I will say, as we're talking about this, for all of you Pathfinder fans out there, this was our first foray into the game.
Yeah.
So a lot of the gripes and the things that we're talking about struggling with, I feel already from having finished this session, I feel like it's going to smooth out in the wash.
I do too. I just having looked through some of the character creation things, I do kind of wince whenever I see something that is giving a +1 bonus to a circumstantial roll. I don't love it, but I can see where Pathfinder 2nd edition makes substantial improvements over how that used to work, but it's still present.
It's still present, but overall, I think the system is doing a lot right.
Yeah.
And the gripes that I have with it are easily countered by the things that are really cool about this system. Mm-hmm. I think that as we talk about the adventure that we played was straightforward, pretty much a cookie cutter first adventure.
Including rats in the basement.
It doesn't take itself too seriously. If you read into it too much, you might be like, why are we on this adventure and why does any of this actually make sense?
Yeah,
but...
and that's okay. I have mixed feelings about this, because getting into the adventure itself, I'm going to be honest and say that the adventure is the weakest part of this entire beginner box. For me, this adventure was very much focused on, here's a almost training level. Like, it felt like a training level from a video game. And I was really disappointed by that, because I feel like we are now so used to just having a little bit more narrative tension in our adventures, coming off to a stronger start with some stakes that immediately engage some role-playing. And this adventure was really just a bunch of combat encounters and completely nonsensical puzzles thrown in between them.
Why were the puzzles there? We're not sure. But there's nothing wrong with it. You get hired to check out who's been stealing fish from the fishery basement, and it leads you into some tunnels and you find out who's been stealing the fish. Through that, though, you encounter several different types of creatures that you fight in combat, but at no point was there much exploration or role play, which, not to do this direct comparison, but I can't help but think of the D&D starter set, which has the Lost Mines of Phandelver, which is very different because it's a multi-week long campaign.
It is. Like, this is going to give you one night worth of adventure.
Yeah, but I will say, if I compare it to Cragmaw Cave,
yes,
I think Cragmaw Cave is the better adventure. It gives you, it starts with exploration. You have to find the cave. There's traps along the way. You're following tracks, exploration. When you get into Cragmaw Cave, there are multiple paths to choose, multiple ways to engage with the environment, and I have never ran Cragmaw Cave without an opportunity that players take advantage of to talk to the goblins or persuade the head goblin to fight against the bugbear, or like, I've had everything from a full revolt in that cave to a slaughter to like the sky's the limit. This felt more like you go room to room and kill everything, and actually the one instance where we did engage in a social encounter, you informed me afterwards that you had to wing that because the book gave nothing for social encounters.
Yeah, so the first couple of encounters in the adventure are against monsters that are very obvious the players can't reason with them. Rats, spiders, undead. And then all of a sudden, they encounter a group of kobolds that are trying to get through a locked door. And instantly, the players, it's like, here's kobolds, we can talk to them. And the adventure doesn't assume that the players are going to talk to the kobolds until 3 encounters later, when it has one of the kobolds surrender in the combat encounter. But by then, our interactions with the kobolds had already been set. And like, you guys wanted to talk with them, you wanted to barter with them, you wanted to reason with them. And I felt that the adventure didn't really give a lot of support for me as a GM for players that wanted to approach this from a non-combat perspective. And having run Cragmaw Cave for players completely new to RPGs who immediately wanted to try reasoning with the goblins, that felt like a very large oversight in this adventure. And at the end of the day as well, the stakes of this adventure were very low. And I feel that for new players, as an introduction to new players, having some meaningful stakes beyond go kill whatever's eating the fish is really important at contextualizing what the experience of being an RPG is all about. And so for me, what makes Cragmaw Cave so special is it's very clear it's a rescue mission. You are there to rescue Sildar. And by a similar token, adventures which rely on the players have to retrieve an artifact or rescue a person, it's very clear when they've achieved the objective. I remember you guys joked, you killed the rats in the basement, let's go get our 10 gold now. And it was like, no, obviously you have to go deeper than that. So like, I feel like that was a weakness of the adventure overall, and I wanted something with a little bit more non-linear approach to it. This was very linear. And something that really exemplified the strength of adventure writing that I expect from the Paizo writing team. The people at Paizo have done adventures like Burnt Authorings and Rise of the Rune Lords. They've got people on their team that have written some of the best starter dungeons, like going back a long ways. Whispering Karen from the Age of Worms Adventure Path was done by Paizo when they were heading up Dungeon Magazine. They know how to write a really good introductory adventure. And this was not a really good introductory adventure. It felt like a training level.
Again, you talked about we killed the rats and joked about leaving, but the fact that we know how RPGs worked meant that we were like, okay, let's go deeper into the cave. But legit, our mission was to find out what was eating the fish.
Yeah.
We went into the basement. A bunch of giant rats attacked us. We killed them and went, well, they were probably eating the fish. And then Kyle even was like, should we just patch up this hole? Mm-hmm. Problem solved. We go get our 10 gold each, and then we leave, and job well done. And the fact is that the book didn't give you anything to tell the players that they had to keep going. You were just like, there's sounds further in the cave. And it was like, okay,
yeah, let's
go because we know we're supposed to. And I never like an adventure that is, let's go because we know we're supposed to because we're playing an RPG game. Mm-hmm. That all being said, we still had a great time.
We had a wonderful time. I could see that they were introducing concepts. Like the first encounter with the rats, very simple. The spider encounter introduces the idea of a ranged attack and that restrains people. The undead encounter introduces damage resistances and immunities and things like that. The kobolds now have an extra action that they can do. Then there's the room with the trap in it. And so there's an unfolding with each encounter building off the last one and adding more mechanics for you as the game master to learn and introduce to the players. And in that respect, wow. Really, really well crafted in that respect. I just wish the story, the narrative, the role-playing opportunities, the dungeon environment, I wanted it to make sense. I wanted it to feel like a real place.
I will also say that we're pretty experienced, and so this might be the equivalent of somebody who doesn't play a lot of video games, picks up a video game and they get that initial screen where it's like, press A to jump, press this to duck. But if you've been playing for years, you're sitting there like, oh my God, like, I get what we're doing, but why am I
Yeah,
doing it?
yeah.
But some people need that intro screen and like need to be able to learn the simple things. But again, I prefer a video game that builds it into something narratively cool than just
Yes.
the let's climb through this training box. There's a big difference there when it's narratively interesting but still teaching you how to play. And I think I've seen better versions of it than
Precisely. I've seen better versions of it from Paizo in their own adventures.
As we look at the conclusions here, all of this to say, any gripes that we had with even the adventure or the system were easily overlooked by how much fun we had playing it,
Yeah.
how smooth of an experience it was for people coming from another TTRPG to jump into this. Did we have to learn some stuff? Yeah. Did it take us long? Not really.
No.
Did we have a great time role-playing our characters, having drinks and food and laughing and enjoying the experience? It was so good. Now, the direct comparison of D&D and Pathfinder, I find it interesting because my takeaway is not going to make anybody happy. I find that when you go online and you talk about D&D, the Pathfinder folks are like, Pathfinder's so much better than D&D, what are you doing? And then the D&D people are like, D&D's so much better than Pathfinder, why would you play that garbage? And they all are yelling at each other. I thought they were Coke and Pepsi. And like, but okay, interestingly enough, Coke and Pepsi, it's the same. A person who really likes Coke is like, Pepsi is trash. But if I go to a restaurant and I say, hey, can I have a Coke? And they say, we only have Pepsi. I go, okay.
Yeah.
And I'm not heartbroken about it. If you said, Kelly, tonight we're playing Pathfinder, you don't get to play D&D, I'm going to go, all right. I found that there was enough differences, but enough similarities that at the end of the day, it's a really cool fantasy TTRPG. It's a system that works. It's a system that has a lot to offer. So does D&D. Do I like one more than the other? I like D&D because I've been playing it a really long time and I know it like the back of my hand. Could I see myself liking Pathfinder at the same level? Absolutely, if I had more time to spend with it.
Yeah, I honestly think that the differences are probably harder to detect at first level.
Yeah.
I think that one of the, and that should be a big disclaimer over this entire review, is that we just played the beginner box adventure so far. And I do think that there's some RPGs where, especially ones that don't have a leveling mechanic, where I feel like you can really assess what the RPG's like after one session. Like you've got a really good idea of how it feels differently. I feel like with Pathfinder, the differences get greater as you level up, is my suspicion. And as you get more deeper into the system, and especially in preparing your own adventures. So for me, I think my next step, honestly, I think I need to run like a 6-session arc and eventually high level play. So I want to play more Pathfinder. I really want to understand how it feels differently. And I think for me as well, I think I need to play it concurrently with playing D&D 5e to really appreciate what the differences are. Because from this experience, the 3-action economy, the conditions, all great stuff. But there were certainly moments during our game where I felt had we streamed that game and not told people what system we were playing, anyone coming into the stream, they would have had to like watch and be like, oh, they are playing Pathfinder.
I also think, like, to go off of what you said, I played a pre-made character. One of my favorite things is making characters. So I think in the future we should do a look at like building a character in Pathfinder. I want to play at higher levels. I want to try out different skills. I probably would have spec'd my cleric a little different than the pre-made one, but that's all stuff that we're going to learn as we continue to experience Pathfinder. But at first glance,
I liked it.
I had a great time.
Yeah.
And so it's great. Like, there's no problems here.
Yeah, the gripes and quibbles that we have with it are just that, gripes and quibbles. This is one of the best beginner box products out there.
Yeah.
Unequivocally. There's some flaws with it, and I think that as an introduction to RPGs overall, I don't know if the adventure is the strongest, but it's a very well-crafted introduction to the system of Pathfinder. And I think for anyone that is learning Pathfinder from D&D 5e in particular, it's worth running it because it's just a great way to be like, okay, here's the differences. And I feel like now I can really speak to what those differences are. But I'm going to need more experience with the system to really assess everything and really to get the deep feel of how they're different.
So stay tuned for us to continue our road to learning Pathfinder. Again, this is a little different than some of our other videos. We have opinions, but our opinions are based on one game and a reading of the initial books that we've opened up. So by no means are we experts on this system. And as we continue to learn, our opinions could change. We could change several perspectives. We might learn more that we didn't get right in this video. The fact is that we actually had a great time.
We did. The hardest part about it actually was the scheduling monster.
Yeah, it took us 4 weeks of trying to figure out what day. We picked so many different days. I was laughing.
So that's a big similarity. Like that's, I mean,
no matter what game you're playing.
Yeah, if you're used to having your campaign utterly destroyed by the scheduling monster, you're gonna find lots of that here. We can say for certain because we rescheduled 4 times. Because,
It just couldn't get a day for everybody to get together.
And even then, Shay was gonna play and couldn't make it either. Yeah. So
we were short one of our players because scheduling.
Yeah.
So all in all, if you are a Pathfinder player or just jumping into Pathfinder for the first time, tell us your thoughts on the starter set or what your experiences with Pathfinder have been like if you've been just learning it for the first time. We'd love to hear that in the description below.
And I want to know, if you're an experienced Pathfinder player, what adventure path do you think is the best one for an experienced D&D 5e DM to run with Pathfinder?
So let us know all that in the comments below.
The videos that we create on our channel are made possible thanks to the incredible generosity of our Patreon supporters. If you enjoy the work that we do here on YouTube, please consider becoming a patron of our show by following the links down below.
And you can check us out playing TTRPGs in our actual play campaign, which airs Tuesday evenings on Twitch. You can find all the previous episodes of that right up over here.
And we've got plenty more content on various TTRPGs as well, including 5e, right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and ring that bell so that you never miss an episode.
Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time
in the dungeon.